There you are, you're standing in front of people. Things seem like they're going well. You're giving your speech, seems to be pretty well received. People are getting it, they're understanding, they're thinking about it, putting it through their heads. You can see them doing that, and you're thinking, hey, okay, this is going good. This is fine. You're thinking, yeah, good, this could work, this could be okay. And as you go through, it's like, great, fine. And you have some complex things you want to kind of get across, and you're trying to get them across, but then you see that look. And you know it's not quite getting across. You think, okay, well, that's all right. I got a few more things to say. I'll make sure I get all that stuff in there. And then your speech gets a little faster, because you got a lot of stuff now you want to get through, and maybe a few details you want to pack in there you haven't thought about before. And as you go through all these things, you're thinking, well, maybe I ought to say this, or perhaps I ought to say that. And these different ideas come to you, and you're kind of going through your speech, and it's getting a little bit more raggedy, but that's okay, because you got all these points you want to get through, and it's all right. And your audience still looks like, and it seems to be getting worse. And you're thinking, okay, that's not good. There's something wrong. I don't know what's going on. And you keep on going, and you talk, and you have more things. Well, maybe they're understanding what's going on. I guess I could better explain better, and stick in some more explanations I hadn't really planned out beforehand, but I guess they're going to be necessary now. And so you stick even more explanations in there about this complex thing that's going on, and the audience is just like, and it's really, really not going well. And then you have this point you really want to get across and explosively, and you have everything go, and you have this kind of story you're going through, and you're running through it, and you're looking for the big payoff, and the audience is still like, figuring, okay, that's not good at all. And you just keep on going through it, and after a while you're like saying, hey, give me something. I just want to have some interaction here. I just want something to connect with. I just want to have things happen. And maybe you do a couple of these, and everybody's kind of looking like, and then it's just not really going well at all. And it keeps on going like that, and you wrap up what's going to be a dramatic ending, but it just kind of thuds, and you're thinking, I don't know what the heck happened. It seemed like it was going okay. I had some good points, but geez, somewhere in the audience, they just weren't getting it, and then they weren't feeling it, and then they weren't connecting, and then it all kind of fell apart. You had that happen? Maybe not that bad, but something like that. Something just fell apart, didn't quite work right. It just didn't connect, didn't flow, and you didn't know why. Well, it could have been because you weren't pausing. See, the thing about it is that the words aren't really the secret of speaking. I mean, words are great. Of course, you have to have words in order to communicate, but people learn on the pauses. And it's important to have pauses in your speech, because that's the only place the brain can kind of say, oh, okay, yeah, all right, I get that, all right, go ahead. And if you watch your audience closely, sometimes you can even see that point where they just kind of got it. It kind of locks in, and they turn their attention back to you. But it only happens if you pause. If you keep on going through and figuring, well, I've got to put in more facts and more details, then they just get overwhelmed, and there's no pausing at all. And they're just like, okay, no, that's not working for me. I don't know what you're talking about. They do one of those numbers. Have you seen those? And that just indicates your audience hasn't really had time to process, for things to sink in. That's the challenge. And so today, you're going to find out about pauses. 3 specific pauses to use in 3 different situations. 3 that you want to think about as you're going through your speech. Each one has a different purpose. Each one will help you in a unique way. If you use 1, it's great, but if you use 2 and maybe even the 3rd, it can be really powerful for your speech. Because speech isn't just the words itself, it's also the power of the pause. And to go back to that example of the speech you gave where you had a lot of complex details going on. This happens in a lot of speeches. Pretty common in business speeches, maybe you've given those. Happens in scientific speeches or conventions where you're presenting in front of everyone. And quite often what will happen to the speaker is, and maybe you had this happen to you, is you get caught up in your head about talking, and you're so busy talking and talking about and figuring out what your next point is, you don't really pay attention to where the audience is. And that's where everything kind of breaks down. Because the audience needs time. Needs time for things to sink in and get down into their head. You can think of it in the same sort of way as water needs to sink into the ground to help a tree grow. See, water on the surface doesn't really help the tree at all because the tree absorbs the water through its roots. So the water has to sink down into the ground where the roots are. Once the water gets to the roots, then the tree can absorb the water and start growing and developing and using all that great water. But if the water never gets to the roots, the water just kind of stays on the surface and never gets down there, then the tree is not going to grow, it's not going to develop at all. The same thing with your audience. If there's just nothing really going on, this whole surge and splash and tremendous tumult of water, if you will, of sound, whatever, but none of it is allowed to sink down in. None of it just kind of destroys the upper crust and it never really gets down, then that could be an issue. That could be an issue. Because people just aren't getting it. They really don't get what's going on. And so that important thing of the pause doesn't happen. And the thing about the pause is that it's very important in this case, and you have to kind of do it the right way. If you do it the wrong way, then people just kind of, they may fall asleep or they'll go back on their phones. If you do it the right way, ideally it'll just kind of let things sink in and then everything will come around. But everything really depends upon the way that you do it. You want to make sure it's the right way that's going to connect with the audience, going to really get them going, and it's not just going to kind of put them to sleep or give them a permission to do something else. As a speaker, of course, you don't want to give the audience permission to do something else because then they'll do that and they won't be paying attention to you, and that's a bad thing. So this pause I've been talking about is called the sense pause. The sense pause. And the key about the sense pause is it's just a brief pause. So you make your points, you're going on, you're explaining things like, oh, there's this thing called the sense pause. Just a very brief pause to let the idea kind of sink in. After it's sunk in, you just continue on with your speech and continue on talking. It also, the sense pause also helps to divide up your conversation, your phrases in your speech, and give people the sense when you finish something and you're moving on to something else. It gives people kind of an overall sense of your speech. But again, the key is you don't want to pause too long. There is a time to pause for too long, or pause much longer. Get into that in a little bit. But for this one, the sense pause, it's just a brief pause, and then you move on. So you pause too long, well, you know how that works. Probably. If you've got one of those phones, the moment somebody seems like, oh, they're done, you're doing your phone thing. Well, there's nothing more disheartening for speakers to see half or three-quarters of the audience doing the phone thing while they're trying to speak. So the sense pause, a little bit of a pause, let things sink in, but not so far that the audience completely disconnects and says, oh, well, I guess you're finished with your speech. I'll get on with my life here. Don't want that to happen. So it's kind of a balance. Look at your audience, check it out, see what's going on. You'll know when you pause too long. You'll get that sense of, okay, got it. I'll kind of be turning away, thinking about things, and turning back to you. And okay, they got it. They understand. That's the sense pause. But as mentioned, there's another pause. All right, now you understand the sense pause. A very brief pause after you say something to make sure the sense of it sinks down into your audience's head. Not too long, not too short. Looking at your audience will help you determine when you've gone on long enough and when you need to go on a little bit longer. But it's important to pause to allow people to get the idea of what you're talking about. Pausing is crucial. It's very important, especially when people want to understand what you're saying. But sometimes you want to go beyond just what you're saying. You really want things to not only just sink down so you understand it, but you want people to feel it. If you're telling an emotional story that's supposed to be powerful, supposed to be engaging, supposed to be interesting, if the audience doesn't really feel anything, the whole thing's kind of a waste. Maybe you've had that happen where you're sitting in the audience and somebody's telling a story and you're thinking, I'm not feeling it. I'm just not feeling it. Maybe then you get out your phone and start doing your phone thing because it's obvious there's nothing going up there for you or that you'd be interested in. So that's the challenge, getting people to really feel what's going on. Get a real sense of that feeling. About how do you communicate what you're feeling to your audience? How do you take some of the challenges and the issues, the emotions swirling through you and get your audience to feel them? Well, the challenge is to get your audience to feel uncomfortable. See, that's the thing with speakers. Quite often, as your speaker, you're thinking, I don't want to make the audience feel uncomfortable. I mean, I want them to be happy and content and relaxed and kind of having a good time and maybe laughing and chuckling and all that stuff. But here's the kind of the secret. That it's great to have your audience happy and content and entertained, but you really want to engage them. They've got to feel a little bit uncomfortable. Because comfortable people aren't going to do anything. Comfortable people don't act, don't take actions, don't get things done. Uncomfortable people do. So if you want your audience to do anything, if you want anything to come out of your speech, or you want them to take an action or do something or think a different way or be a different way, you're going to have to make them uncomfortable. So you're probably thinking, okay, Tim, how do I do that? Well, here's where the pause comes in. That longer pause I was talking about earlier. This is where it can be really useful and really effective. It's called the dramatic pause. The dramatic pause. And it's called dramatic because it takes all the emotions kind of swirling around you and the situation you're in, and it allows the audience to experience those situations. Remember I talked about things just kind of sinking in? Well, things sink in if the audience understands them. But if the audience to feel them, they have to sink in even deeper. Which means you've got to allow enough time for things to sink in pretty deep. Which means the dramatic pause is a pretty long pause. And it'll feel uncomfortable for you on stage. If you're pausing and you don't feel uncomfortable, you haven't paused long enough. So maybe you're thinking, Tim, okay, what's an example of dramatic pause? Let's say you have a story where your wife left you. Your whole speech is kind of building up this story about your wife leaving you. If you're a man or a woman, whatever, just say it's about your wife leaving you. If you're a woman and you're so inclined, it's about your husband leaving you. Or it could be about your wife leaving you too. Whatever scenario works for you. And this one, just pretend, is about your wife leaving you. So everything in your story is building up to this point of your wife leaving you. And you want your audience to feel that. So when it comes to that climactic point, when you come back and you find the empty house, you just say that. I came back. The house was empty. My wife had left. Was that uncomfortable? It's kind of a long pause, right? That's exactly the point. A long pause. That's the dramatic pause. So you want to get your audience uncomfortable, use a long pause, a dramatic pause, and let the emotions sink in and let them really feel what's going on. Well, now you've learned about the sense pause. Just a little bit of a pause after what you're saying to let it sink in so the audience can make sense out of it. And this is useful when you're speaking about something complex or you've got a lot of details. You want to make sure the audience gets it before you move on to the next thing. But if you want your audience to feel something, really feel something you're talking about, use the dramatic pause. Dramatic pause is a much longer pause, and it happens in one or two places in your story where things really build up to a dramatic moment. Usually it's only one place in your story. You don't want to overuse it. You overuse it and you're pausing all the time, that just wears out your audience. But use it at least once after a very emotional story when it builds up to that climax. That can be powerful. Remember, the dramatic pause is a pause of a pretty long time. If you don't feel uncomfortable pausing that long, your audience won't. So pause until you start feeling it's a little bit too long. It's probably about the right amount of time. Maybe now you're wondering, Tim, what other pauses could there be? I mean, you got a pause for making sense of things. You got a pause for emotional connection. That's it, right? Well, there is one other you might want to use if you want to get your audience to interact with you directly in the speech. It's a pause that's a bit of a risk because it requires the audience to actually interact with the speech, either out loud or in their mind, ideally out loud. And you have to kind of cue your audience in to do this because it's not normal for people to do that necessarily in the middle of a speech. Some people are just like, they're just going to listen. They're thinking, okay, I'm listening. You're not really talking. It's you talk, I listen. That's how it works. So to get your audience to actually talk and reverse that talking, listening situation, you have to do something a little bit special. And that's what this next pause is all about. Because the goal is to get your audience to say something. Maybe you're wondering, Tim, how do you get your audience to say something? What the heck are they going to say? Well, that's exactly it. How do you get your audience to say something? How do you get your audience to respond in words to something you're saying up there? What is it that in the human brain works so well that it gets people speaking even when they hadn't really planned to? That's the completion pause. Completion pause. This is a pause you use when you interrupt a word you're saying or an idea you have, and the idea is so powerful, so logical, so laid out, the audience knows exactly what you're going to say next or would have said next, and they complete it. Which means, although usually it's a good idea to use quotes that are obscure or different or not well known, with a completion pause, you want to use quotes that are very, very, very well known. You want to use quotes that you think everyone or most everyone in your audience will know. So for instance, if you're going to use a completion pause, you might use something like, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. So common, such a cliche, your audience most likely knows it. The trick is, you're not going to finish it. You're only going to give them part of the message and cue them to complete the other part. This will allow the audience to participate in a very simple, non-confrontational, safe way. The audience can feel comfortable they're filling in the right stuff. The audience can take the risk that, okay, this phrase I definitely know, I can say this phrase. I know exactly what it is. But it's really powerful because the whole audience starts saying it. Completion pause is very simple. You simply say, when the going gets tough, and you kind of conduct the rest of it. And most likely people in your audience will say, tough get going, because they know it so well. Now, it takes a little bit of risk, as I said, and you're a little bit uncertain maybe, haven't necessarily planned it out with the audience, really can't, but it's pretty safe if you pick a very, very well-known quote. And that's the completion pause. When you get up in front of your audience, don't think everything you're doing up there is all about speaking in words. Words are only part of what you're doing up there. Also, you want to engage your audience and make sure things sink in. And to do that, you want to use pauses. One important pause to use is the sense pause. Use the sense pause so people get a sense of what you're talking about. It's just a brief pause after what you're saying to make sure everything sinks in so the audience gets it and understands it. Use the sense pause when you're explaining some details, when you're giving technical specifications, anytime you want to make sure the audience is really understanding things. Every speech you give is going to have some place where a sense pause is going to be natural. Where just a natural place to let the audience stop, catch their breath, get a sense of what you're talking about, and then move on. And if you watch them, you even see them do it. You'll finish your sentence, you do the sense pause, watch your audience. They got it, now you can move on. In addition to sense pause, if you really want to touch people and get them inside emotionally connected, you can use a dramatic pause. A dramatic pause is much longer than a sense pause. A dramatic pause is something you really want things to sink in further than just here. You want really to sink in all the way. As opposed to a sense pause, which kind of makes sense, you want people to feel what's going on. And to do that, you want to make them uncomfortable. You make people uncomfortable by pausing so long, they've got to not only understand what you're saying, but feel and start really thinking about the implications and what that would feel like, and gradually put themselves into that picture. A dramatic pause is used ideally once, maybe twice, but most likely once in your speech when you build up to a very dramatic moment where something huge has happened. And then you stop and pause a long time, let that sink in until the audience gets it. And the final pause is the completion pause. Use the completion pause when you want the audience to say something back to you. Now, a trick to get the audience to respond to you is to make sure the audience knows what to say. Of course, you can't prep the audience in advance, so you have to be pretty sure the audience knows what you're going to talk about, which means you use something very, very common. A phrase, old chestnut, a phrase so worn, so used, so abused, that everybody out there is going to know what it is. Now, since it's a cliche, there's a risk some people won't want to say it back, but the good thing about a cliche is everybody knows it, and it gives the audience a chance to actually get involved and do something. The audience is just sitting out there listening to you, which is fine, but can get a little bit boring. This allows the audience to get interactive and actually do something in response to your speech. So if you want to use a completion pause, you might say something like, when the going gets tough. And you kind of conduct the audience in what's going on so they'll know, okay, when the tough get going, they'll get the sense of it. And also, by directing them, you make sure that the words come out clearly and it's not just a bunch of people randomly saying things throughout the audience. If you want to really improve and develop your speeches, you've got to connect with the audience. And connecting with the audience is more than words. If you only focus on words, there'll come that part where you look out in the audience and because you haven't given the audience enough chance to really let things sink in. And when you do that, things fall apart. You try to do everything you can from the stage, but with the audience not getting it, it's not going to work. But if you do allow things to sink in, really sink in so they get it, and you use different pauses, you'll discover that you're more certain of yourself on stage, and people see you as being more certain on stage. You won't waste any time in your speech, but you'll know when to connect and how long a pause to give, because the audience will give you feedback on what works and what doesn't work. You'll become more comfortable just being up here, and you'll enjoy yourself, and you'll be able to do more speaking and get more happening from your audience, because your audience will want to take action and really change themselves based on your speech and your speaking. So if you really want to get your audience motivated, up, and doing things, remember, it's not just the words, it's also the pause.